He spent his last $38,000 on a barn no one wanted, weather-beaten, half-collapsed, and echoing with silence. But what he found inside wasn't ruin. It was the beginning of something that would heal more than just the walls. If stories like this stir something in your soul, stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the love we find in the most unexpected places, subscribe to Soul Moment Story and stay with us. Because what happens next just might change everything. The old truck coughed as Holden Cole pulled onto the dirt road, tires crunching over gravel and dead leaves. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The faded GPS screen blinked. You have arrived at your destination. Beside him in the passenger seat, Rosie hugged her threadbare backpack like a life raft. Her eyes were wide, silent. She hadn't said much since Memphis. Maybe because she sensed what he did. This wasn't a fresh start. This was a gamble. And they were down to their last chip. In the rearview mirror, Holden saw their entire life: 2 suitcases, a half-packed guitar case, and a worn-out stuffed rabbit Rosie had named Clementine when she was 4. Everything they owned fit in the back of a rusting Ford F-150 with a cracked windshield and 1 working speaker. He parked. The engine wheezed to a halt. "Is this it?" Rosie asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Holden stared ahead. There, it was the barn. It wasn't just old. It was ancient. A sagging frame of grayed-out timber, its red paint long surrendered to sun and storms. The roof sloped like tired shoulders. Ivy clawed up its side. 1 door leaned off its hinge, swinging slightly in the cold October wind, like it wasn't sure it still belonged. "This is it," he said finally. Rosie didn't move. Her small hand found his. "Does it have a bathroom?" Holden gave a choked laugh. "Let's find out." They climbed out the wind, sharper than he expected. This far from town, it smelled like rain and wood smoke, the faint sweetness of fall decay. A hawk wheeled above in the pale sky. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside was darkness and silence, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. Dust motes swirled in the faint light from a cracked window high on the far wall. A few abandoned crates, a rusted plow, the skeleton of an old workbench. It smelled like rot mice and wet wood. "Daddy." Rosie's voice trembled. "Are we going to live here?" He crouched beside her. "No, sweet pea. We're going to start here." She didn't look convinced. Honestly, neither was he. 3 months ago, Holden had a job, an apartment, and a wife, though in truth he'd lost Lainey the year before. The aneurysm took her in her sleep, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. 1 minute she was humming while brushing Rosie's hair, and the next, she was gone. He spent the next year trying to hold everything together with duct tape and denial. He worked the loading dock during the day, bartended at night. But grief was a slow acid. It didn't shatter him. It wore him down. When the factory closed and the rent jumped $400, he realized there was no saving what he had. So he cashed in the life insurance, sold the furniture, bought the barn. Because the truth was, he couldn't afford to fail again. Not with Rosie watching. They set up camp in the truck that night, sleeping bags in the back seat. Instant soup warmed over a propane burner. Rosie curled against his side fingers in Clementine's matted ears. She didn't cry. That scared him more than if she had. "I miss Mama," she said into his shirt. "I do too," he said. Every day. They fell asleep to the wind, howling through the gaps in the boards. Holden dreamt of rain leaking through the barn roof, drowning them slowly. The next morning he woke to a noise, a click. He sat up fast, heart thudding. Another click. Soft, deliberate, like wood tapping wood. He eased open the truck door. Frost clung to the windshield. The sun was low, weak. Then he saw a flicker of movement inside the barn. He grabbed the flashlight and motioned to Rosie to stay put. Inside, the air was colder than outside. He swept the beam around. Crates, shadows, dust. Click. The sound came from the back near the hayloft ladder. He moved closer, slow. Then something darted small, fast. A blur. Holden swore and swung the light, and froze. Two eyes stared back at him from behind a broken feed bin, wide, terrified. It was a little girl, maybe 8. She didn't speak, just crouched lower. "Hey," Holden said gently. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." No response. Behind her, another form stirred. A woman. Young. Pale. Exhausted. She rose slowly, protectively. "Don't come any closer," she said hoarsely. Holden raised his hands. "This is my place. I just bought it." "I didn't know anyone was coming," she said. We needed somewhere warm." She held the girl close. There was a boy, 2 younger, curled up in a blanket behind them. "You live here." "Not live," she said. "Hide." He looked at them. The girl's shoes were worn through. The boy's cough rattled. The woman's face was lined with shadows. Holden took a breath. He could call someone. Tell them to leave. Reclaim his barn. Start clean. Or he could remember what it felt like to be out of options and still trying. He nodded. "There's a pot of coffee in my truck," he said. "Let's start there." The coffee was weak, bitter, and scalding. But it was hot. And in the moment, it felt like kindness. Holden poured it slowly into a mismatched set of enamel mugs he'd found in one of the plastic bins beneath his truck seat. He offered one to the woman first. Her hands shook slightly as she accepted it. She didn't thank him. Not in words. But the way she held the mug, close eyes, closed for a second, as the steam rose, it said everything. They sat on overturned crates outside the barn in the gray morning light. Rosie stayed close to Holden, watching the strangers with a mix of worry and curiosity. The little girl, Maddie, clung to her mother's side, silently mirroring Rosie's caution. Only the boy, maybe 4, seemed oblivious, gnawing on a granola bar like it was treasure. "My name's Holden," he said finally. "This is my daughter, Rosie." The woman nodded. "I'm Jenna. That's Maddie. And the little guy is Caleb." Holden waited, but she didn't volunteer a last name. He studied her early 30s maybe, though her face looked older in the cold light. Exhaustion lined every feature. But underneath there was something sharp, a tension like a coiled spring. "Where are you coming from?" he asked carefully. She didn't look at him. Nowhere worth going back to. It wasn't much of an answer, but it wasn't untrue. Holden let the silence stretch. The wind whispered through the dry corn stalks in the distant field. A crow called somewhere in the trees. Winter was circling. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said finally. "I thought we had more time before anyone came. This place has been empty so long we figured it'd stay that way." "Yeah," Holden said. "It almost did." She looked at him then. "Why would you buy it?" That was a fair question. The place was half collapsed. No electricity, no plumbing, no future anyone with common sense could see. Holden shrugged. "Because it was all I could afford, and because Rosie deserves better than the inside of a truck cab." A flicker of something moved in Jenna's expression. Recognition, respect, maybe even guilt. "I can pay for the coffee," she said quietly. "I don't want charity." Holden didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over at the barn, his barn now supposedly, and at the people huddled just outside it. He'd bought it thinking he was buying empty land and rotting wood. But maybe it held more than that. Maybe it had already been claimed in a way that paperwork couldn't erase. "I didn't offer it as charity," he said. "Just figured folks freezing in a barn might need something warm." Jenna looked away again, jaw tight. She wasn't used to kindness, that much was clear. Maybe she didn't trust it. Holden understood that too well. Later, when the kids were playing in the dirt near the well, Holden helped Jenna carry their meager belongings into the back corner of the barn. A few blankets, a torn duffel bag, 2 nearly empty packs of diapers, a half-used bottle of Tylenol. Nothing else. "You've been here long?" he asked. "A couple weeks," she said. "Before that, an abandoned church in Missouri. And before that, someone's shed. And before that," Jenna hesitated. "Then, Army. 8 years. 2 tours." Holden nodded. He didn't press. She leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. "After I got out, there wasn't much waiting for me. VA was backed up. PTSD program was full. I tried a couple jobs, got let go. Said I had too much edge. Whatever the hell that means. Probably means you didn't smile enough," Holden said dryly. That almost got a laugh. Almost. "I had nowhere to go," she said. "So we just kept moving." He nodded again. The quiet between them wasn't awkward now. It was mutual understanding. 2 people with different scars, but the same kind of broken. "I know what it feels like," he said softly. "To run out of places." Jenna looked at him then, not suspiciously, not guarded, just looked. And in that moment, Holden saw her not as a threat or a stranger, but as something far more dangerous. Someone who knew exactly what it cost to survive. That night, Holden moved Rosie's sleeping bag into the barn's warmer corner, closer to Jenna and the kids. He lit a single battery lantern and set it in the middle. The barn creaked and whispered around them. Rosie whispered, "Are they going to stay?" "I don't know," Holden whispered back. "Do you want them to?" Rosie thought for a long moment. "Maddie said she hasn't slept in a real bed since last Christmas." Holden's chest tightened. He kissed her forehead. "We'll figure it out." Outside, the wind picked up. The barn groaned like it remembered storms long past. Jenna sat by the lantern sharpening a pocket knife, not out of threat, out of habit. Holden watched her hands move, calm, controlled. "Jenna," he said softly, "you don't have to run anymore." She didn't look up. "That's what people say, right before they stop helping." "I'm not people," he said. "I'm just a dad, like you're a mom. And maybe this old barn can hold both of us." For the first time since he met her, Jenna smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't long, but it was real. The first frost came early that year. By late afternoon, a thin sheen of white clung to the tips of the pasture grass. Inside the barn, Holden was using a handsaw to shape the edges of a second-hand door he'd scavenged from a hardware salvage yard. It wasn't much, but he figured if he could section off one corner of the barn for Rosie, she might finally sleep through the night. She'd started waking again quietly, but often asking questions he had no good answers for. Are they staying? Do they have a grandma? Why does Maddie always look so scared? Holden didn't have answers because neither did Jenna. She barely talked unless it was necessary. But her silence wasn't cold, it was measured. Like she was still deciding if the world was safe enough to speak to again. That morning, while the kids drew pictures in the dirt with sticks, Holden found Jenna sitting at the edge of the field, staring out across the dried corn stalks, her face stiff as granite. She didn't flinch when he approached, just asked, "You ever wonder what happens to people like us after?" After what he asked, she pulled at a thread on her sleeve. After we stop fighting, after we stop surviving, what are we supposed to be then? Holden sat beside her on the upturned milk crate. The air was quiet. Only the wind answered. "I think we're supposed to figure it out together," he said. That evening, while Rosie and Maddie made up songs about imaginary goats, and Caleb napped under a blanket of burlap, Jenna sat across from Holden by the propane heater he'd rigged with a car battery and stubborn hope. She was staring at the flames, her hands clasped around a chipped coffee mug. "My husband was killed overseas," she said suddenly. No preamble. No warning. Holden didn't move. He didn't need to. Third tour, she continued. His convoy hit an IED outside Fallujah. They told me it was instant, that he didn't suffer. She scoffed softly. But I suffered, for 2 years straight. I'm sorry, Holden said, his voice low. She nodded like she'd heard it before and didn't need it, but still appreciated the shape of the words. I joined up after that, she said. Everyone thought I was crazy. Widow with a 3-year-old enlisting in the army. But I wasn't trying to serve. I was trying to disappear. Holden looked at her, not with pity, never that, but with recognition. He knew what it meant to want to vanish, to dissolve into something that didn't feel like you anymore. I served with the 173rd Airborne. Was good at what I did. Really good, actually. They even tried to fast-track me for intel work. But my brain wouldn't stop bringing the war home. She tapped the side of her head with 2 fingers. You can't unsee it. Can't unhear it. Kids screaming. Men bleeding out. Your team calling your name and you're too late. Holden said nothing. I came back, and I didn't know how to be a mom anymore. Maddie didn't recognize me at first. She hid under the bed. Caleb was still a baby then, but I think even he knew I was more ghost than mother. Jenna's voice cracked on the last word. She blinked hard. It was the first time Holden had seen her that were not defensive, not closed, just human. They wouldn't give me full disability. Said I didn't have enough documented trauma. Can you believe that, she asked bitterly. I had nightmares every night. I jumped at the sound of my own heartbeat. But it wasn't on paper, so it didn't count. Holden's jaw tightened. Yeah, I can believe it. They offered me transition counseling once a week. That meant waiting 3 hours for a 30-minute talk with someone half my age who kept asking if I wanted to harm myself. Her laugh was short, hollow. I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel anymore. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The barn creaked in the wind. Somewhere outside, an owl called. Rosie shifted in her sleep, murmuring a name, maybe her mother's. Maybe a dream. Holden cleared his throat. You ever hurt anybody? Since you came back, Jenna looked up sharply, but he wasn't accusing. He was asking with the weight of someone who understood what the question really meant. No, she said. I wanted to. God, did I want to? But no. I broke a wall. Scared Maddie. She didn't talk for 3 days. That's when I knew we had to leave. Leave where shelter in Little Rock. It was overcrowded, underfunded. You know the type. One night a guy tried to get into our room. Said he just wanted warmth. But the way he looked at Maddie, I pulled a knife on him. Holden stared into the fire. I would have done worse. She looked at him, then really looked. Yeah, you would have. A long silence settled over them again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was earned. 2 people who'd walked through hell in different boots, sharing warmth beside a borrowed flame. Jenna, he said. Finally, his voice low. You don't owe me any of this. But I'm glad you told me. She gave a tired smile. That's the problem with not talking. Eventually, it gets heavy enough to crush you. He nodded. You can stay, you know, as long as you need. I'm not charity, she said again, almost instinctively. I didn't say you were. I said you were welcome. And for the first time, the walls she'd built so carefully, brick by brick, pane by pane, cracked just a little. She whispered, Thank you. And Holden, who hadn't heard those words from anyone but Rosie in months, nodded. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is accept kindness. The storm rolled in with no warning. Holden had seen his share of bad weather growing up in rural Tennessee. But this one felt different. The sky turned a thick, bruised gray by mid-afternoon. The wind picked up sharply, snapping through the brittle corn stalks, like fingers through dry bone. Even the animals, what few feral cats and field mice still called the barn home, had vanished into crevices. Inside, Rosie and Maddie were coloring with pieces of chalk on the plywood floor. Caleb napped nearby, curled into Jenna's old army jacket. Jenna herself was outside gathering firewood from behind the barn. Holden stepped onto the porch he'd just started repairing and called out. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "You feel that drop in pressure?" Jenna stood a bundle of branches in her arms, her eyes lifted to the sky. "Yeah," she said. "It's not just weather. It's the kind that brings memories with it." She said it without flinching, like a woman who'd learned that ghosts often arrive with thunder. Holden took the wood from her arms and ushered everyone inside. As he closed the heavy barn doors, the wind slammed them with a force that rattled the hinges. Within an hour, the rain was hammering down sideways. They lit the propane heater and pulled all the blankets into one corner. The kids huddled together, faces lit by the orange glow. Thunder shook the ground. Lightning flashed through the narrow gaps in the wood, like a warning. Rosie whimpered. "It's okay, baby," Holden murmured, pulling her close. "We're safe here." But something in his voice trembled. He didn't feel safe. Not because of the storm, but because of what storms brought out in people. He looked over at Jenna. She was stiff eyes, unfocused, breathing shallow. Her hands were clenched, her knuckles white. PTSD. Holden knew the signs. Lainey had worked as a nurse in the VA clinic before she passed. She used to come home with stories of soldiers who couldn't sleep near windows, who flinched at firecrackers, who froze at thunder like their bodies couldn't tell time anymore. Jenna was in two places at once, the barn and somewhere far away with smoke and screaming. He stood crossed the barn slowly and knelt beside her. "Jenna," he said softly, "you're here. You're not there anymore. Just listen to my voice, okay?" She blinked fast. Her hands trembled. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Holden said. "And that's okay. You don't have to be fine." For a moment, she looked like she might snap at him. But then just as quickly, her shoulders sagged. She let out a breath that seemed to carry 10 years of weight. "I hate storms," she whispered. "I hate how they sound like helicopters, like the world ending." Holden nodded. "I know. But this world isn't ending. It's just wet and noisy and temporary. You're safe. The kids are safe. You did that." Her eyes glistened. "You've been carrying this alone a long time," he said. She nodded. "You don't have to anymore." For a moment, silence reigned inside the barn, thick but not heavy, almost holy. Then Caleb let out a small sneeze. "Great timing, little man," Jenna murmured. And just like that, something inside her began to thaw. Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Holden and Jenna sat near the lantern, their legs almost touching the storm, still muttering outside. "You really spent everything you had on this place?" she asked. He nodded. $38,000. It was all that was left after. Well, everything. "Why a barn?" he chuckled. "Because no one else wanted it. I figured that made it mine." She looked around. "You know, in another life, this place probably saw horses. Maybe weddings. Maybe war. Or moonshine," he added with a grin. That earned him a real laugh. "What about you?" he asked. "You ever dream of a different life?" Jenna paused, as if the question had never been allowed to take root before. "I used to want to be a teacher," she said. "Before the war. Before grief rewrote everything. You'd have been a good one." She glanced at him, surprised. "Why do you think that?" "Because you're patient. Tough. And because you notice everything." He expected her to brush it off. Instead, she said, "No one said anything kind to me in months." He looked at her. "Then let's start over. Every day. You and me. The kids. A little less haunted. A little more human." They sat in silence after that, but it was the kind that wrapped around them like a blanket. Outside, the storm began to slow. The barn creaked in relief. Rain softened into drizzle. And for the first time since he bought the place, Holden believed that maybe, just maybe, the barn was meant to be more than shelter. It was meant to be sanctuary. But peace never stays long. The next morning, when Holden walked out to check the side field, he noticed fresh tire tracks leading up the path, wide, heavy. Not his truck. Someone had been there, during the storm, and they hadn't knocked. Holden crouched near the tire tracks, his fingers hovering just above the wet grooves pressed deep into the earth. They were fresh, less than 12 hours old, and too wide for his old Ford. Whoever had driven up here last night hadn't come to sightsee. He glanced back toward the barn, still cloaked in soft morning mist, its silhouette gentle against the tree line. Inside, Rosie and the others were still asleep, curled in a tangle of blankets. He could hear the faint sounds of Maddie's laughter filtering through the cracks in the wall as she dreamed. But Holden didn't feel at peace. The wind carried no birdsong this morning, just stillness. The kind of stillness that pressed on your chest. He followed the tracks as far as the side fence, where they looped, once then veered back toward the main road. No footprints, no sign of a stop. But whoever it was, they'd come close enough to see the lights through the barn walls, maybe even close enough to watch. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Back inside, Jenna was already up boiling water over the propane stove. She didn't look up when he walked in. "You're up early," she said. "That storm shook more than the roof last night." Holden hung his jacket near the door, then paused. "We had a visitor." That made her head snap up. What he told her, everything, the tracks, the distance, the timing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "I knew it." Holden narrowed his eyes. Knew what Jenna set the kettle down and rubbed her forehead. "I've seen that truck before. Big black lifted tires, windows so tinted it might as well be a hearse. It was parked outside a gas station in Pine Hollow 2 weeks ago. I was trying to find a payphone. He watched me for a long time." "You think he followed you here? I don't know," she said. "But if he did, it's my fault." Holden stepped closer. "No. Hey, stop. You don't get to carry that alone. Not here." She looked at him, her eyes heavy with something between fear and guilt. He didn't do anything, just stared. But it was the kind of stare that makes your skin itch, like he knew I was running. Holden's voice lowered. "Was it someone from the army?" "No," she said. "Worse, civilians who think they're gods. Someone from a shelter I stayed at in Kansas. He tried to." She stopped herself, jaw tightening. "That's enough," Holden said gently. "You don't have to explain," but Jenna straightened her spine. "Yes, I do. You have a daughter to protect. You should know what danger you're letting in." She took a breath, then let it out slowly. "He cornered me in the hallway. Said I owed him something for the night's bed. I had a knife in my boot. I didn't use it, but I showed it to him. He backed off. I left with the kids at first light. Never saw him again. Until Pine Hollow." Holden's face darkened. "And now he might know where you are. Which means you're not safe anymore." He shook his head. "That's not how this works. We don't run anymore. Not you. Not me. We hold. Together." Jenna blinked at him as if surprised by his certainty. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I didn't buy this barn to hide. I bought it to rebuild. And if someone thinks they can threaten what I'm building, they've got another thing coming." Her voice was small. "You'd fight for us." Holden didn't hesitate. "I already am." They spent the rest of the morning checking the perimeter, reinforcing the doors with extra beams, piling sandbags along the base of the barn. It felt almost ridiculous, like pioneers preparing for a siege, but Holden didn't care. Sometimes the best way to beat fear was to give it something solid to run into. That night, Jenna couldn't sleep. Neither could Holden. They sat near the front of the barn with the lantern between them, its glow soft and steady. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "I don't know," Holden admitted. "But if he does, we'll be ready." She stared at him. "You really mean that?" "I do." Then softer, almost to herself. "No one's ever stood between me and danger before, not without asking something in return." Holden looked at her. The hard angles of her face softened in the firelight. "Well," he said, "I'm not no one." A long silence passed. "I used to believe in people," she said, "in the good ones. But the war, the system, the streets, they took that belief piece by piece. And now," she met his eyes, "now I think I want it back." That night with the wind quiet and the world still, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. Jenna leaned her head on Holden's shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The next morning, Rosie was the first to rise. She peeked outside and screamed. Holden shot upright, heart hammering. He bolted to the door and froze. On the fence post, stuck with a hunting knife, was a scrap of canvas. Slashed into the cloth were 3 words. "You took her." The knife gleamed in the cold morning light, its blade crude, but deliberate, a hunter's tool, wedged deep into the old fence post, like a threat made flesh. The canvas scrap flapped with the breeze, the words burned into it by a heavy hand. "You took her." Holden stood frozen. Behind him, Rosie's small hand slid into his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daddy, who wrote that?" He crouched down, blocking her view. "It's nothing you need to worry about, sweetie. Go inside. Stay with Maddie and Caleb. Tell Jenna I'll be right there." Rosie hesitated. Was it about Ms. Jenna? Holden met her gaze. There was too much truth in her eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "But I'll keep you safe. That's a promise." Back inside, Jenna was already pacing, her hair pulled back tight, her body taut with the kind of tension Holden recognized, the kind soldiers wore like a second skin when a fight was near. She didn't wait for him to speak. "What did it say, Lee? Words?" Holden said. "You took her." Her face drained of color. He handed her the knife and cloth. Her hand trembled as she read it, but her jaw locked. "I knew he'd follow," she muttered. "I just didn't know when." Holden leaned against a post, arms crossed. "Start from the beginning, Jenna. I need to know what we're up against." She looked at the kids in the far corner, Maddie brushing Caleb's hair with a plastic fork. Rosie offered a cracker like it was a peace treaty. Innocence in motion. Jenna's voice dropped low. "I met him at a shelter in Wichita. His name was Royce Keller. Said he was a donor. Used to show up with bags of groceries and a big smile. Played the hero, but he wasn't there for charity. He was shopping for desperation." Holden's blood chilled. He fixated on Maddie. Jenna continued. Said she reminded him of his niece. Harmless stuff at first, little gifts, sweets. But one night, I caught him stroking her hair while she slept. I confronted him. He laughed. She took a breath. He offered me money. Said he could take Maddie off my hands, that she'd be better off in his care. I punched him. Then we ran. Holden exhaled through his nose. "You did more than right, Jenna. You did what a mother should do." She looked at him, the storm behind her eyes returning. "Now he's found us, and he won't stop." Holden walked over, took the knife from her hand, and turned it in his palm. "Then we won't stop either." That afternoon, Holden drove to town, his old truck rattling across gravel like a stubborn warhorse. Jenna wanted to go, but he insisted she stay, not just to protect the kids, but because the face of their enemy might bring her back to the battlefield in a way she wasn't ready for. He stopped at the sheriff's station first. Sheriff Dallas Briggs had a permanent toothpick between his lips and a habit of leaning too far back in his office chair. "Stalker knife on your fence," Dallas drawled, skeptical. "You sure this ain't just some ranch feud?" Holden slid the canvas across the desk. "Look again." Dallas's eyes narrowed as he read it. Holden spoke before the sheriff could deflect. "Her name's Jenna, Army vet. She's got 2 kids with her. This guy tried to traffic her daughter. He's not going to stop until something stops him." Dallas sat forward, now chair creaking. "You got a plate number?" "No," Holden said. "But I've got a description." Big black truck lifted. Tinted windows. Kansas plates. She saw it near Pine Hollow. Dallas scribbled notes. "I'll put out an alert." "But Holden, we're a long way from backup out here." "Don't go playing cowboy. I'm not playing." Holden said, his voice like steel. "If he comes again, I won't wait on paperwork." Back at the barn, Holden found Jenna sitting on the porch steps, her arms around all 3 children. Caleb was asleep in her lap. Rosie leaned against her side like they'd always belonged there. "I told them," she said softly. "I didn't want to lie." Holden nodded. "Good. Kids aren't blind. They deserve the truth even if we soften the edges." She looked up at him. "Sheriff believe you enough to send word, but not enough to act fast." Jenna gave a bitter smile. "That's about what I expected." Holden knelt beside her. "Jenna, we have choices now. I can take Rosie and drive far, get her somewhere safe. Or we can send you and the kids to the VA women's shelter in Raleigh. I've got contacts." She shook her head. "I'm done running. And so are they." He nodded slowly. "Then we stand together." They sat in silence, the barn behind them, wind swaying the high grass dusk, falling slow like a curtain over a stage that was far from quiet. Then Jenna turned her face toward his. Her voice was a whisper. "You think a place like this, a man like you, can really heal people like me?" Holden reached up, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "No," he said honestly, "but I think it can start." And just like that, something between them shifted again, not loud, not urgent, just steady, like roots finally taking hold in soil long thought barren. But as night fell again over the barn, Royce Keller sat parked beneath a broken billboard, 15 miles down the road, his fingers tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with his own breathing. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slow. "They think they're safe," he murmured to no one. "They think wrong." The headlights flicked on. The game was just beginning. The first thing Holden noticed that morning was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind, the hush that comes with snowfall or a child's deep sleep. No, this was the kind that felt wrong. Hollow, like something had been taken. He stepped outside, boots crunching on the frozen ground. A fine mist hung low over the fields. The air was sharp, like breath held too long. The fence line, which he'd reinforced just days before, stood still until he saw it. The northwest corner had been clipped, not torn down, not trampled. Clipped. Clean intentional. A warning. Holden's stomach sank. He scanned the ground and found them deep boot prints in the mud leading from the break to the barn's far side, then vanishing into tire tracks that peeled off down the old gravel road. He didn't need a note this time. Royce had been there, and closer than ever. Inside, Jenna was already up lacing her boots. Her face was tight controlled, but Holden saw the flicker in her eyes when he told her. How close, she asked. Too close. Her hand instinctively reached for the knife she kept in her boot. Holden noticed she wore it differently now, not hidden, but ready. He nodded toward the kids still asleep on their pile of blankets near the heater. They didn't hear anything. Good, she said. Then quieter. I'm tired of them living like this. So am I, Holden said. But today, We stop hiding. They spent the morning turning the barn into a fortress. Holden nailed sheets of scrap metal across the lower windows. Jenna reinforced the main doors with crossbeams salvaged from the collapsed chicken coop. They created makeshift alarms, strings of empty cans that would rattle if touched shards of broken mirror near the entry paths to catch movement. The kids helped too in small, innocent ways. Rosie painted a "No Monsters Allowed" sign and hung it from a nail on the barn wall. Maddie found pebbles and stacked them like sentries near the hayloft ladder. Caleb toddled behind them, mimicking every gesture, every whisper. It might not stop a man like Royce, but it made them feel stronger. And sometimes that was enough. By dusk, the barn had transformed from a relic into a redoubt. Holden and Jenna sat on the porch again, watching the fields like sentries. She handed him a mug of instant coffee. "Do you think he'll try again tonight?" Holden didn't answer immediately. The horizon was dipped in gold, the trees casting long shadows across the dying corn. "He's building up to something," he said. "He's testing us, looking for a weak spot." She nodded. "It's what predators do." Holden looked over at her. "You ever feel like prey?" Jenna stared straight ahead. "Not anymore." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. A dog barked in the distance. The wind picked up. Then Holden said something he hadn't let himself say out loud, not to her, not even to himself. "I don't just want to protect you." Jenna turned. "I want to belong here with you, with the kids, with this messy, healing, half-built life. I don't want to keep people safe and send them away. I want to stay." Jenna's breath caught. For a long moment, her eyes searched his face like she was afraid to believe him. Then she whispered, "So do I." And just as the last light dipped below the ridge, her hand found his. That night, Holden didn't sleep. He sat near the front of the barn, the shotgun across his lap. Not because he wanted violence, but because the man threatening his home was a kind that didn't listen to words. At 2:14 a.m., the cans rattled. Holden stood instantly boot silent on the dirt floor. He moved to the side slit in the door and peeked through. There, just at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure. Black coat, ball cap, a flashlight in one hand, swinging slow like a pendulum. Royce. Holden's breath slowed. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Then Royce raised his free hand and pointed directly at the barn. He didn't shout. He didn't charge. He simply stood there like a hunter, waiting for the right moment. Then he turned, walked to his truck, and drove off. By morning, the message was clear. Royce wasn't afraid. He was playing a long game. Jenna stood beside Holden at the fence line, staring at the boot prints again. "He's not going to stop." "No," Holden said. "But I will." She looked up at him, her voice shaking. "How we take this to someone bigger than Royce. The sheriff's slow, but there are people who still care. You said he's crossed state lines. That makes it federal. You think the system will listen now?" Jenna asked, half laughing. Holden's voice was calm, certain. "I think the system listens when someone refuses to back down." He turned to her. "I've risked everything I had on this barn. But now I realize it wasn't the land I was meant to save. It was you." And for the first time in weeks, Jenna let herself cry. But they weren't tears of fear. They were the tears of a woman finally seen, finally believed, finally home. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. That morning, after checking the perimeter once more, Holden found Jenna in the hayloft, sitting cross-legged with an old wooden box in her lap. Dust caught in the shafts of light from the slatted window made her look like a still frame from a war photograph, half soldier, half child, suspended in time. He didn't say anything, just climbed the ladder and sat a few feet away. After a long silence, she opened the box. Inside were a few folded documents, dog tags, a broken wristwatch, and a neat bundle of letters tied with olive green thread. Holden recognized the script immediately, careful, disciplined. Military, maybe. Or just someone who'd learned the hard way not to waste paper or words. "I used to write letters I never sent," Jenna said quietly. "To my mom, to Maddie's father, to the army, even to God." Holden didn't move. The air between them was sacred now. She picked one from the middle and unwrapped the thread. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. "This one," she whispered, "was for me." She cleared her throat and began to read aloud. "Dear Jenna, you're not broken. I know it feels like it. I know some nights you curl up and wonder if you'll ever feel clean again. But you are not the sum of what happened to you. You are not what you've lost. You are what you choose to carry and what you choose to put down. I hope one day you find a porch to sit on and a hand that doesn't flinch when it reaches for yours. I hope Maddie sees you smile and knows it's real. And I hope, more than anything, that you forgive yourself. You've survived war. Now learn how to survive peace. With love, the you who still believes." Her voice cracked on the last word. Holden swallowed hard, his chest tight. "That's not just a letter," he said. "That's a lifeline." Jenna nodded, folding it back with practiced care. "I wrote that during a bad night in a shelter outside Houston. The kind of night where the walls feel too close and the memories don't stay in their cages." "Why didn't you send it?" She gave him a half smile. "Because I didn't know where to send it. I didn't believe it yet." Holden leaned forward. And now Jenna looked at him, really looked, and said, "Now I do." She reached into the box again and pulled out another letter. This one was thicker, written in a heavier hand. The paper was worn, stained at the corners. She passed it to Holden. "Read it." He hesitated. "Are you sure I want you to know?" He unfolded it and began reading silently. "To whom it may concern. This letter serves as an official report and testimony regarding the events that occurred during Operation Amber Thorn in Kandahar Province, June 2012. Sergeant Jenna Mallory acted in direct defiance of a superior officer's unlawful order, which placed multiple civilian lives at risk. She refused to authorize an airstrike on a village known to house non-combatants, despite pressure from her commanding officer. Her actions resulted in the evacuation of 17 Afghan civilians, including 9 children. As a result, she was reprimanded for insubordination and reassigned. No commendation was issued. I write this not as a fellow officer, but as a witness to her courage. Her choice cost her career, but it saved lives. If there is any justice left in the institution we both served, let this record stand as proof. Captain Ellis Monroe, U.S. Army RT. Holden finished reading and looked up slowly. "You were punished for saving children." Jenna's eyes shone with tears she didn't try to hide. "They said I compromised the mission, that I was too emotional, too soft. But you were right." "I was right," she said softly. "But I lost everything because of it. My clearance, my rank, my future." Holden set the letter down beside her. "And yet here you are saving children again. This time, your own." "Anbeen." Her mouth trembled. He moved closer. "You haven't just survived peace, Jenna. You've built it. One brick, one breath, one broken moment at a time." The words hit something deep inside her. She closed her eyes and let the truth settle. Then she asked the question she hadn't dared ask until now. "Do you think I deserve a new life?" Holden didn't hesitate. "I think you've already earned it." He took her hand in his, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. That night, Jenna sat beside Rosie, brushing her hair with slow, steady strokes. Maddie lay curled under a blanket nearby, holding Caleb's tiny hand. Holden watched from the corner, his chest full of something both heavy and light. Love, maybe. Hope. A kind of quiet, knowing that even when storms passed through, even when fences failed, some homes still stood. Not because they were built with brick or stone, but because someone chose to stay. The knock didn't come with thunder or flashing lights. It was soft. 3 slow raps, deliberate, measured, like someone tapping the lid of a coffin. Holden sat upright instantly. His hand moved without thought, gripping the old Winchester he kept by the cot. The air inside the barn was still thick with night and unfinished dreams. Jenna stirred beside the children, eyes blinking open. One look at Holden's face, and she was fully awake. Another knock. 3 more. Harder this time. Holden stepped toward the door, barefoot, steady. Jenna stood too silent, his breath knife already in her hand. The kids remained asleep in the far corner, the flicker of the propane lamp casting long, shaking shadows. Holden peered through the crack in the planks. Black truck. 1 man. Royce Keller. He wasn't trying to hide. He stood right there on their porch as if he had every right to knock. Holden cracked the door 2 inches, shotgun aimed center mass. "You're trespassing." Royce didn't flinch. "We need to talk, cowboy. You get 30 seconds. Royce took off his cap. His face was thinner than Holden remembered, drawn, pale, unshaven. The face of a man losing control. "I don't want trouble. Just the girl." Holden's voice dropped. "That's not a sentence a man says and walks away from." Royce's eyes glinted. "She's mine. She was promised to me." Jenna stepped into view behind Holden, her voice cold as the air. "You're delusional. You were warned." Royce's nostrils flared. "You owe me. I gave you shelter. Food. You agreed I agreed to nothing," she snapped. "You preyed on women too scared to say no." Holden stepped fully into the doorway, blocking Jenna with his body. "You come here again," he said. "You don't walk away." Royce laughed, once short and mean. "You really think this ends with a barn and a bedtime story? You think love fixes everything?" "No," Holden said. "But it fights harder than hate ever could." Then he slammed the door. The next few minutes passed in a blur of adrenaline. Holden locked every entry. Jenna stacked crates near the children as cover. The shotgun was loaded. Her knife was strapped to her thigh. Outside, they could hear Royce pacing, muttering, scraping something along the side of the barn. Then, silence. Too much silence. Holden risked another look. The truck was gone. But Royce wasn't. He was somewhere in the dark, waiting. The sheriff didn't arrive until dawn. Holden had called the moment Royce left. This time, Dallas believed him. There've been complaints, the sheriff said, flashlight scanning the ground. Another shelter came forward. And a woman from Arkansas. Same story. Same man. He kneeled by the tire tracks. He's not gonna stop. But now I've got enough to bring him in. Jenna stood nearby, holding Maddie's hand. "So why hasn't he been arrested?" Dallas exhaled. "Because evil doesn't come with a siren. It creeps. It waits. But we're watching now. You're not alone anymore." That day, something changed. Holden added a new mailbox at the end of the drive, painted it white. Jenna carved their initials into the side with Rosie's help. They planted marigolds beneath it, not because they were safe yet, but because they were claiming ground. A place that said, "We are still here." That evening, the barn felt different. Warmer. More like a home. Jenna cooked beans and rice over the stove, while Holden fixed the radio antenna. Music hummed through the barn, old country soft jazz bits of static between notes. At one point, Maddie asked, "Is he gone forever?" Jenna knelt beside her. "He won't hurt you again," Holden added, "because we don't run anymore. And you don't have to be afraid." Then, out of nowhere, Caleb toddled across the barn, tripped over Rosie's toy truck, and landed straight into Holden's lap, giggling. It was the first time he'd done that. Jenna saw it, and in that small, sacred moment, her entire guard dropped. Later, after the kids fell asleep, Holden and Jenna sat outside beneath a sky littered with stars. The cold bit at their fingers, but neither of them moved. "I used to dream of places like this," Jenna said. "A barn, a porch, a man who didn't flinch when I showed my scars." Holden turned to her, and she smiled faintly. I stopped believing it was possible. But now, he reached over, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't need perfect," he said. "Just real." She leaned in slowly, and this time, when their lips met, it wasn't about fear or rescue. It was about belonging. Far down the road, Royce sat in the dark of a gas station parking lot, the truck idling low. A sheriff's cruiser passed by without stopping. Another 2 hours and the sun would rise. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years he looked afraid. Because he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the hunted. The first real snow came without warning. One moment the sky was pale gray. The next, white flurries spun in slow circles across the fields, like dancers waking from a long sleep. It wasn't heavy, just steady, gentle. The kind of snow that blanketed the past and gave the future something soft to grow from. Holden stood at the front of the barn, coffee in hand, watching it all settle in silence. Behind him, laughter echoed the real kind. Rosie squealed as Maddie tugged her down the old hallway on a makeshift sled made of a storage bin lid and a frayed rope. Caleb sat inside like a little king, grinning from ear to ear. Jenna leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, a smile tucked into the corner of her mouth. "Looks like we're officially snowed in," she said. Holden sipped his coffee. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not," she admitted. "For the first time in a long time. I kind of hope it never melts." The inside of the barn had changed. It no longer smelled like sawdust and mildew, but like wood smoke and vanilla candles. Rosie had hung paper stars across the beams with old twine, and Jenna sewed curtains out of flannel shirts Holden found in a forgotten trunk. The walls were patched. The floor was clean. The cold still crept in, but warmth lived here now. That afternoon, Holden installed the final panel of insulation with Maddie's help. She handed him nails like a surgeon's assistant, utterly serious in her task. "You ever think you'd be doing this?" he asked. Maddie shrugged. "Nope, but it feels good. Good like fun." She shook her head. "Good like..." "Right." Holden paused. "You're wise beyond your years, kiddo," she smiled. "Mom says I'm just tired of running." He handed her the hammer. "Then let's build a place worth staying in." That evening they ate chili around the fire. Not the instant kind. Real chili beans soaked overnight tomatoes from a neighbor's greenhouse meat Holden traded firewood for at the gas station. It wasn't fancy, but it was earned. Jenna watched as Rosie tried to teach Caleb how to dip cornbread. Her eyes softened a kind of awe behind the quiet. "You gave us this," she said to Holden. He shook his head. "No, we built it." "No," she repeated gently. "You gave us the space to believe we could." There was a pause. Then she added, "You risked everything on a broken-down barn, and somehow it gave us all back more than we ever had." Holden looked down at his bowl steam curling upward like a prayer. "I thought I was saving a piece of land," he said. "Turns out, I was saving myself." After dinner, Rosie handed Holden a folded piece of paper. She'd drawn something in crayon, a picture of the barn, with stick figures, him, Jenna, Maddie, Caleb, and herself. Above them, she'd written in big block letters, "Our home." Holden blinked hard. "Rosie," he said, voice low. "You really think of this place as yours?" She nodded fiercely. "It's where Mommy sings again, and Maddie smiles. And you cook better than school lunch," he chuckled. "That's a low bar." Then Rosie leaned in serious now. "It's where people don't leave. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Holden and Jenna sat in the hayloft, wrapped in a quilt Rosie insisted they use because it had magic protection threads. The snow outside reflected moonlight, casting silver streaks across the floor. Jenna held a mug of tea, her hands warm inside Holden's. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous." She nudged him. Then quietly, "We could make it official." Holden turned to her. "The barn." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "Us. This." His breath caught. Not from fear, from the weight of something he'd hoped for, but never dared name. "You mean papers and rings, or Sunday pancakes and joint checking?" She laughed softly. "Maybe both. Maybe just roots." Holden stared at her for a long moment. Then he whispered, "You sure?" She nodded. "I've lived in bases, bunkers, bus stations. I've known fear and flight and silence. But I've never known peace like this." Holden's eyes softened. "Then let's plant those roots deep." They didn't kiss right away. Instead, they leaned into each other, foreheads touching the kind of closeness that doesn't need fireworks, just presence. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a home took its final breath of becoming and settled into being. The next morning, Holden climbed the ladder to the roof and nailed a new sign above the barn doors. It didn't say, "Welcome." It said, "Homestead." Not homestead, not a place to escape to, but a place made from the people inside. A barn that had once been forgotten, a family that had once been scattered, and now roots in the snow. Spring came late that year. The snow melted not in a rush, but in slow surrender, like the barn itself had decided it was ready to bloom again. Patches of green poked through the thawing earth. The apple tree by the fence, once a brittle skeleton, showed its first buds, and the creek out back, silent for months, began to sing once more. Inside the barn, life had also shifted. The propane heater had been replaced with a proper wood stove. The walls were insulated, painted. A real kitchen, small but sturdy, stood in the corner. The hayloft had become a reading nook lined with donated books and warm blankets. There were photographs now. Rosie and Caleb covered in flour after baking cookies. Maddie holding her first report card from the little school Jenna had helped reopen in town. Jenna and Holden on the porch at dusk, wrapped in that ridiculous magic protection quilt. No longer a barn. A home. On a quiet Sunday, Holden sat on the porch step, sanding a piece of cedar for a toy box he was building. Jenna leaned against the railing, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one for her, one for him. She passed it over, watching him with a smile that had grown less cautious, more certain. "You know what today is?" she asked. Holden looked up. "The day I realized sanding by hand is overrated." She rolled her eyes. 2 years. Since you bought this place." He paused, letting that sink in. 2 years ago, he murmured, I walked into a realtor's office with $38,000 and no plan beyond don't drown. And now he looked up at her. Now I wake up to you. To laughter. To something I don't have to fix, because we're building it together. She nodded. That's what love leaves behind, you know. Holden raised a brow. Sawdust and unmatched socks. Her voice softened. Space, for people to become who they were always meant to be. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dallas pulled up in his pickup. He stepped out slow as ever, hat in hand. Thought I'd drop this off, he said, holding out an envelope. From the judge's office. Took long enough. Jenna took it, reading the label. Her name. Maddie's. Caleb's. Inside was the final paperwork. Her record officially expunged. Custody affirmed. No more shadows. No more threats. She looked at Holden. Tears welled, but she smiled through them. It's over, she whispered. He shook his head. No, darlin'. It's just beginning. That evening, the family gathered for dinner under the stars. A new table, handmade, long and uneven, stood in the middle of the pasture, strung with lights overhead. Friends came. Neighbors, who once called Holden crazy, now brought pies and potato salad. A retired chaplain offered a quiet blessing. Rosie made a toast with sparkling apple juice, declaring them the bravest family in 3 counties. And when the sun dipped low, Holden stood and raised a glass. "To risk," he said. "To the kind that costs you everything and gives you back more than you knew you needed." He looked at Jenna. "To the woman who didn't knock, but walked into my broken barn and made it sacred." She smiled through tears. "And to the love we build, not by wishing, but by staying." The crowd clinked glasses. As the night quieted and the stars emerged, Jenna and Holden sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, their fingers laced together. "I never asked," she said. "Why'd you really buy this place?" Holden thought for a long time before answering. "Because it was broken," he said. "Like me." He looked out at the moonlight on the barn roof. "But now I see. It wasn't broken. It was waiting." Jenna turned to him. "For what?" He kissed her temple. "For us." In the years that followed, the barn became something of a legend. Locals called it the Haven, a place where lost things were found, where tired hearts came to rest, where people whispered about a single dad with wild eyes and a steady hand, and the soldier who never stopped fighting even when the war was over. No one ever asked why they stayed. They just knew something lived in that barn once, and what lived there changed everything. And maybe that's the true miracle when we risk everything, not for what we see, but for what we believe might still be waiting inside. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave us a comment below, whether it's a quiet town in Nebraska, a snowy cabin in Vermont, or somewhere far across the world. Your presence here means more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories that speak to the quiet strength of kindness, love, and second chances, feel free to subscribe to Soul Moment Story. We'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you truly for spending your time with this story. From our hearts to yours, stay safe, stay kind, and never stop believing in the unexpected.